Welcome to the Practice You podcast. My name is Elena Brower. Let's dive into today's conversation regarding life's myriad transitions and how we refine our responses in our relationships, our wellness, our households, our work, and in our practices. You are invited to learn and love and listen with me. Welcome to Practice You. Welcome back to the podcast. I am so happy to present a rare part 2 of a conversation with Mallory McDuff. She is the author of Love Your Mother, and that was the topic of our first conversation. She teaches environmental education at Warren Wilson College outside of Asheville, North Carolina. She lives on campus in a 900 square foot house with her 2 daughters and a small footprint. She lives with an expansive view of the Appalachian Mountains, and that is in her bio. And this gives us an idea for what is in her cellular makeup, and you will hear it in her voice. She's the author of actually 4 books, including Natural Saints, How People of Faith Are Working to Save God's Earth. Of course, Love Your Mother, previously discussed. Her essays have appeared in the New York Times, the Washington Post, Rumpus, Sojourners, and more. Today, we are here to talk about a topic very, very close to my heart right now. It's called Our Last Best Act. This is the book, forward by Becca Stevens, that has the subtitle, Planning for the End of Our Lives, to protect the people and places we love. So buckle up, grab your tea, and please join me in welcoming Mallory McDuff. Thank you for being here.
I'm so glad to be here. Thank you.
And you have a quote from Terry Tempest Williams on the cover, which is no small thing, a gentle and compassionate bow to the earth. So wonderful. This book, I started by page 9. I had 5 dog ears and about 15 underlines. We're going to talk first, if I may, Mallory, about local options for green burials that restore rather than degrade the earth. I'd love to have a little bit of context from you as to what a green burial is for a listener who may not know, and then go into how do we actually locate opportunities for green burials, because I know I'm putting it into my will and testament as soon as possible, rather than cremation, which is very damaging to the environment, rather even than burying a body in the ground, which is also can be very damaging because of the chemicals that are used in the process of embalming and burial. So I'm so excited to learn from you, and thank you for being here today.
What a gift to be here. And I think for me, talking about what we do with our bodies after we die, or what other people will do with our bodies after we die more appropriately, for me, anytime I'm able to talk with an individual, a group, it goes personal and practical really quickly, because the reality is that while we think about death in a very maybe spiritual or abstract way, when somebody dies, logistics are a big part of what happens next. And this book really is the story of my 1-year journey to revise my final wishes to be more sustainable and to have climate change, community, and cost in mind. And so we can talk later about what in my story kind of prompted that journey. But to answer your question, I think it's important when we talk about what is green burial to think about the difference between conventional burial, and that is burial that is often has embalming. It might have exotic hardwoods, for a casket and a concrete vault, for example. That's conventional burial. And then when we think of traditional burial, how we buried bodies for years and years and years until the Civil War, when embalming in the U.S. became a practice. Those two differences are important because green burial, people think about it as something new. That term is new, but the practice is actually one that's rooted in our history. Green burial, by definition, means no embalming. So an embalming is not required in any state in the country. So no embalming, no vault. And the vault is often concrete liner that lines the grave that is really, these days, only there to keep the ground level so landscaping is easy. But it turns out it's not actually needed that much. So no embalming, no vault, and the materials that you use being biodegradable. So anything from a pine casket to a linen shroud. Or in my dad's case, he wanted to be wrapped in my mom's linen tablecloths.
Oh, that's awesome.
Cost nothing and was certainly biodegradable. So no embalming, no vault, and biodegradable materials. And there's a lot of different ways you can, go about green burial, which we can talk about. And just the last thing that I'll say on this is that, green burial is only one of many options that are actually more sustainable than conventional burial or flame cremation. And we can talk about some of those other options, anything from aquamation to human composting. So for me, this book was a journey where I learned what I didn't know. And those are always the best journeys, right? I mean, when you learn quickly, like, oh, wow, there's so much that I didn't know, even though I had gone through, my dad's burial that was a green burial. So, but that's a long definition, but a little bit of context too.
I appreciate it. Personally, I would love to talk about the other options, aquamation and so forth, because I feel, for my listener, we're all of a certain age where we're starting to have to think about this. And when I consider the options and I hear about the chemicals, the exotic hardwoods, I don't feel at all connected to having any trace of me left. So that's not an option. Cremation being so damaging to the air. Let's talk a little bit about those other options, if you will.
Sure. And for me, vocabulary is important in these conversations because what we call something, we're also many times paying money for that service. So knowing what we're exploring, researching, or paying for, this book allowed me to realize there's not just one form of cremation. So I thought flame cremation was the only cremation that existed. And that was what I had put in my final wishes. But I'm 57 years old. I live on a college campus. Environmental studies is the most popular major. Everyone I knew in my age group, flame cremation was what they had put down in their final wishes. So it was certainly a cost-effective choice. And I didn't really question anything else. And, if you were trying to discern between like conventional burial versus flame cremation, I would get cremated before I'd embalm and have a vault,
For sure.
et cetera.
For sure.
But there's two types of cremation, and that's defined by the industry. So flame cremation is one of them, and it's actually more than half of folks in the U.S. choose that as their option, and it's predicted to rise dramatically, in the next couple of decades. It's easy to do. You can be anywhere and get cremated. And it's a good choice for, if you think about accessibility for people who are mobile, who are moving around. But there's another form of cremation that I learned about, and that's called aquamation. And so that's using water and lye and transforming the body into a product that really actually can go down the drain. It's not toxic at all. And when we think about the products of cremation, flame or aquamation, it's really ground up bones. We call them ashes, but really what's left is bone, crushed up by a machine. So those are two types of cremation, and aquamation is available in more than 20 states, and that number is growing. It's been available for pets and cattle, et cetera. So that's just vocabulary that's important when you maybe call around in your home region to see, okay, what is available? A lot of funeral homes are investing in the equipment for aquamation. The other thing that's important to me, as somebody who teaches environmental education, we know with flame cremation, you're burning fossil fuels for several hours. But I think it's really important for us to know that, like, in this book, I really share that one life, like what happens with my little body is not going to, transform the climate emergency. So I'm not naive enough to think that my one action is going to have this huge impact. However, what I see is that the collective actions, if I think about the US right now in terms of it's really a revolution within death and dying, how people are taking ownership and realizing they have more choices. And it is in our history, in our stories, we know that collective action creates momentum that then makes a tremendous difference and will make a tremendous difference. And it's not just to me about the climate impact or the environmental impact, but I can speak with great certainty and profound embodied knowledge that my engagement with my dad's body, and he wanted a green burial. We didn't have that language then, but he wanted his family to prepare his body for burial, and to have that tactile, the embodied is the only word I can think of, that close contact with death has transformed my relationship with his death in my life. It's layered, but it's also just empowering in such a profound way to realize there are options when I personally didn't know they existed before.
Thank you for that. Page 137 of the book for our listener, if you do get the book, Our Last Best Act. It's really beautiful. Page 137 is where we talk about the process of alkaline hydrolysis or aquamation. Total carbon footprint, 1/4 of the carbon footprint from flame cremation. Definitely a more sustainable choice. I'll just go over what you wrote about the process itself because I'm kind of amazed. The process occurs in a stainless steel high-pressure cylinder filled with water and lye. It's heated to about 200 to 300 degrees Fahrenheit. In 6 to 12 hours, the body fully dissolves, leaving the bones and the liquid, which could totally go down the drain. Costs are about $150 to $500 more than flame cremation. Here's the scandal. The word lobby. Casket makers lobbied against legislation for aquamation for humans due to the threat of competition. Can you imagine? Wow. The smart mortuaries will invest in alkaline hydrolysis as a greener alternative, I would imagine, as you've written. What are you choosing, Mallory, if I could ask you, if I could be so bold as to ask?
Well, that was which was fun for me. The premise of the book was I was going to explore all of these options, and every chapter is one of the different options, from human composting, which we can talk about too, which is legal in 7 states, to body farms, to burial in your backyard. So I had all these options that I was exploring. And my audience, I'm a single mom with 2 daughters, and the one who was at home at the time, my daughter is almost 18. She's 17.
Right. Yeah, mine is 17 as well.
Yeah,
at the
that's
moment.
what I thought. From following your social media.
Sweet girl. Thank you so much.
And there's camaraderie with anyone, I think, who's
totally
has a roommate who is at that age.
Yes. Totally.
So I kind of, the conflict in the book, or the tension in the book, was I would spend the day talking with somebody who's advocating or researching and implementing human composting, for example, in Washington State. It's now legal in 7 states. Or I would visit a body farm where you can donate your body for the study of decomposition. And then I would come home and I would probably, like that enthusiastic parent that any teenager would roll their eyes at just a bit, because I was coming home and like super pumped to talk about death. And as annoying as my teen may find me at any given point, she doesn't want me to die, And so it was an interesting tension of having these conversations with a young person who ultimately, she and her older sister would be the ones who have to, handle whatever happens to my body after I die. So at the beginning of the book, I thought I knew the end of the story, which is such an illusion, right? Like I thought, I know how this book is going to end. And I thought I would choose burial at a conservation cemetery that is near Asheville. It's called Carolina Memorial Sanctuary. And conservation cemeteries are burial grounds where the land is protected in perpetuity by conservation easements. So it's like green burial plus. You get the advantages of green burial, but you get an added advantage that the land won't be developed. And you go to visit, it's like going to a park. You can walk, whatever the landscape is in your region, that's what it looks like. But it's so fun to take students to the conservation burial ground here because, no matter what age they are, everyone has some experience with death and dying.
Right.
And these are students studying environmental studies. And so for them, they're just blown away that a place that looks so just natural, in a place you would want to go, a place that's soothing, there's not tombstones that are standing up. GPS is how people locate the grave sites. In the book, I actually quote at the end some of their essay responses on a final exam when they were just asked to share their experience with going to a conservation burial ground. And so that's what I thought I would end up choosing. And the short of the long is that I ended up it was a 1-year dialogue with the Presbyterian elders of the cemetery on the college campus where I teach. And I was advocating for them to not require vaults. So there's this beautiful cemetery that's half a mile from my house. And nobody really knew that the contract required vaults because they really hadn't done very many full body burials because so many people are just cremated. And so it was just it was a long story, but the short of the long is that I spent a year low key lobbying these elders to change the policy. Spoiler alert, I bought a plot there, in the cemetery that's right near my home.
And I'm just reading in chapter 5 about this place. You volunteered there. Is this the same place where you volunteered?
It's interesting. The Carolina Memorial Sanctuary is the conservation burial ground. And there are conservation burial grounds across the country. And so listeners, if you're interested in where are places where I could choose green burial, one of the best resources is the Green Burial Council. And they've got a great website and you can look up, on an interactive map. So that is a place that's like in partnership with conservation organization the land is protected. So that's what I thought I was going to do because it's like, oh, it's so obvious. It's like super environmental. I'd be taking my students there for years. But what I ended up choosing was the cemetery on the college property, and only because of a long, deliberate, frustrating, but ultimately productive dialogue with these at the little cemetery, a local cemetery owned by my college, where they ended up changing their policy to allow green burial. But it wasn't just, I asked, and the 80-year-old said, oh, sure. It was a process. So that's the other kind of lesson to me in this is that one of the chapters in the book is about local cemeteries. So someone may go to the Green Burial Council and think, oh, wait, there's not a green burial site near me. But yet, if there are local cemeteries nearby, you can often just ask. You're not asking for them to add anything. You're just asking to not require a vault.
Right. The idea of all that embalming fluid in the ground, going into the groundwater, is so daunting.
Well, it is daunting. And I think what's even more daunting for me is the fact that a lot of people don't know embalming is not required.
It's formaldehyde.
Well, yeah, and a lot of people think that it's required.
No.
I was careful to say, look, I'm doing this journey and I'm reflecting on my values. There are cultural practices around death that are several generations of a family. We do it this way, But I think just to me, the take home was like an awareness of what is required and what isn't,
right,
and what our options are.
It was interesting to me on page 75, which I flagged for myself too. Obviously, green burial doesn't carry the carbon footprint of cremation or the excessive waste and pollution of conventional burial with the gallons of embalming fluid, formaldehyde buried in the ground. But you also read a survey, the National Funeral Directors Association, in which only 48% of the respondents were aware that embalming isn't necessary. I was interested additionally to learn that other common characteristics of natural burial sites include the depth of the grave, which is about 3 to 4 feet rather than 6, to promote decomposition of the body, because obviously more oxygen and bacteria are present, and that the grave site also uses native plants and trees. So cool. And if headstones are used at all, they're often natural stones, native to the burial ground, lying flat. Like, these are all the choices that I think I definitely want. I think that any one of us would want. For our listeners' case and information, Mallory, the real substantive difference between the college campus cemetery and the conservational ground for you was what exactly?
Well, the real difference for me, they both would have been great options for me. I came down to that. But my daughter, who was 2 years younger at the time, when I talked to her about the difference between the two, she said, I'm going to come back and bring my family to Warren Wilson, which is where the cemetery is. She's like, that's where I'm going to come. I'll show them. She's projecting, right? She's right now only 17, but at the time she was, 2 years younger. I will show them where I grew up. I'll show them where we lived, our little rental house. And the cemetery, it looks just like our front yard. It's cow pasture, it's surrounded by mountains. It's gorgeous. And so it looked like home to her. And, the conservation cemetery is not that far away. It's like, it's like a 15-minute, 20-minute drive. But to her, she was like, well, we would never go way out there, But I think for me, looking and feeling like home is, made a lot of sense to me. And, there were many parts of this little advocacy show, many parts of it where I thought, okay, there was one elder, his name was Ray Stock, and he was short and he was stocky and he was like a kind of bulldog, and he was in his late 80s. He was, a retired math teacher at the college, but a Presbyterian elder who he was in charge of the cemetery basically because he had a ride-in lawnmower, and he mowed. And as these things go, who ends up doing the job? Sometimes the person who can do the job. So he was very protective of the cemetery. And the interesting thing was that I knew a Muslim student had been buried there maybe 10 years earlier. And I had known the student, and I knew that in the Muslim and the Jewish faith, those two faith traditions, they don't allow a vault. You have to be buried. The Muslim tradition is just with a shroud. But so there's no vault is allowed and no embalming as well. But the vault was the big issue. So we just kind of went back and forth, and I would go over to his house and, he had the plots just like on a big poster board, and I thought, oh my God, if you die, like, is this the whole history of where everybody's buried? This is in the college cemetery. It's now on computers. But, I just tried to listen as best I could. And it was then COVID hit. And so the pastor, and the school is not affiliated with the Presbyterian Church now, but it was in its founding. And so there's a Presbyterian chapel on campus. And the cemetery is actually owned by the church. And so the pastor there was like, I think you should ask for an exemption to the vault policy based on your religious convictions or values as to care for creation. And I'm Episcopalian. And, there's the precedent of this Muslim student who had been buried. So I was like, dang, that's a great idea. Like, I never would have thought of that, even though I've written books about faith traditions and climate. But I asked for an exemption, and we had a Zoom meeting it was me and the three, older men and the pastor. It was middle of COVID, and Ray just kept asking like these questions where I was like, okay, you don't want to do this because I'm like this young person asking you to do something, even though I'm, almost 60, But they went to the cemetery to take a vote, the three guys. And I was just so dejected, like, if I can't get them to agree to this, like, what can I do? And the end of the story is that the pastor called me and said, well, they didn't agree to the exemption.
Wow.
And I was like, God dang it.
Dang it.
I was like, I said something else. And he said they agreed to change the entire policy.
Wow.
And the crazy thing about it was that Ray then died actually a month later. I mean, he was in his late 80s. He died a peaceful death at home, and his family contributed funds for the upkeep of the cemetery. And now there's a little, plaque in the cemetery. But that, just to clarify for everybody, that is like a local, like, neighborhood cemetery. And so similarly with my parents' deaths, they were buried in a neighborhood cemetery that the contract did not require vaults. So they knew that. So my dad knew that he could be buried there without a vault. Yeah. So
Wow. I mean,
long story, but the question of what did I decide is a little layered.
yeah, it's wonderful to hear the various layers and facets of it, because all of us have, all these considerations. Our religion, like, I'm Jewish. Pretty sure cremation's not okay. Pretty sure that's what I always thought I would do. And since reading your book, I'm more of the mind of a green burial, where, wrap me up in some really beautiful textile, set me in the ground 3 feet under, and let the bugs have at me. I'm good.
Right.
It's fine. Or aquamation actually sounds really good, but I think I'd prefer the green burial, feed the earth.
Right. Well, and the feeding the earth, the human composting option, particularly, it was developed with the consideration of urban areas where, maybe there weren't adequate green spaces for cemeteries or whatnot. That was the impetus. And the company that has been on the forefront of this is called Recompose. And they have a wonderful website that really walks you through the process of how does a human body become compost that you could use on the earth. So that's legal in 7 states.
Do you know which states have that
it will be
legalized?
Increasing. Yeah, I do.
You do.
Well,
Smarty pants.
Well, I've got my little index card because I'll tell you, I have to keep the notes because the number is increasing. So I have my notes only because I can't call sometimes as it increases, which is a great thing. Washington, Colorado, Oregon, California, New York, Vermont, and Nevada.
Got it. Okay.
And then you can Google human composting states and that will come up. But that number is going to increase.
Let's go, New Mexico. Let's go.
It's so practical. Well, and New Mexico is right there in the proximity of
Colorado. We're really close. We're only a few hours away. So that's great.
And the company in Colorado that I think is, I don't know if they're crossing state lines to do this work, but they're looking at it, called the Natural Funeral. And they do green burial, human composting, and I believe they also do aquamation. But you can look at their website and, for them, and I think for all what seem like alternatives, and some of them are, but what I've found is that the folks who are in this business are really emphasizing the relational aspect of the rituals around death and dying, which so many of us, don't have. I think about the fact that by the time, if somebody chooses to or has a kid, there's a pretty high likelihood at some point you've seen a baby, and you've probably even held a baby, but we don't have that equivalent relationship here with death and dying. And I think everybody I met that is in this work, it is that life's work, from the death doulas, that I interviewed, to folks who are, on the forefront of whether it's green burial or human composting. It's the relational. What is our relationship with each other, those who are still living, and what is our relationship with those who have died, and how can these practices help us create meaning out of really hard shit.
Yep.
It's just, yeah.
Wonderful. It's so good to know all of this. I feel, after reading your book and now after talking to you and getting a little more context, I feel much more equipped. My partner's mom is 83, and she is slowly declining, fully aware of it, has been basically regaled by the two of us, James and me, for the last couple of years, where she's now here. We're imploring her, please, to never go back to New York. It's enough. And, we're just taking really good care of her, encouraging not to get any more scans and not to busy herself with any more doctors, and just to live out her days. She definitely has cancer, and to live out her days, with beautiful long walks and great meals and time with us. And, she's finally relenting and assenting to these ideas, which is nice. And I look forward to sharing all of this with her, because I think it will bring her great comfort. She is an environmentalist of her own right, and I think she'll really appreciate this. And we're close to Colorado. So
Right.
Yeah, I can talk to her about all these things. It's very close to home now. Anything else that I perhaps have not touched on that you would like to touch on for our listener with regards to our last best act?
Well, for me, like both my parents died within 2 years of each other, and they were about my age, in their late 50s. And they through hiked the Appalachian Trail, the Pacific Crest Trail, the Continental Divide Trail. They biked everywhere, and they lived in my hometown of Fairhope, Alabama. They were both, my mom was hit by a teenage driver and killed instantly. And then it was her death that really set my dad into motion with articulating his wishes with us. I mean, he built a little pine casket, like a prototype of the casket he wanted, and he wanted to build his own casket. We grew up with him talking about death, just as he talked about, okay, we're going to go split wood and we're not going to turn on the heat. We're going to use the wood stove. He was like the back to the landlord who also sold computers for IBM. That's like,
welcome to America.
Yeah. And my mom was, the homesteader who also, had a knitting group and was on the altar guild at church. They didn't think of themselves as alternative, but they were ahead of their time. And I guess my point that I wanted to make is that when my dad sat us down and said, here's what I want, I want the family to be in charge of the funeral and not just a funeral home.
Right.
And he laid out in quite explicit detail what he wanted. And at the time I thought, okay, this is how you are grieving, and I will do whatever you say. But I kind of thought it was like planning for something that was decades away. And 2 years after my mom died, he was also hit by a different teen driver.
No.
And
where?
And yes, yeah, in our hometown.
No. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I mean, and it's.
Oh my gosh.
So I guess my point is that his being proactive with us and talking about it. I mean, I did not want to talk about his death a month after my mom died. I was in my 30s. I was a new mom. I was just like trying to, nobody wants to. But in my complete and total shock of his death, the 2 pages he gave us, 2 single space pages with his final wishes, those pages, which I still have, they gave us both grounding and momentum.
Yeah.
And they showed us a path through total shock. And it was logistics, but the logistics allowed me to then, like here I am years later, getting to talk about them and getting to honor a practice that feels consistent with who he was and who my mom was and who I am. And that's what I think these practices do, is they create relationships long after someone has died. And that to me was his last best act, which at the time, I didn't know.
Right. I have something that I would like to close with. We're going back sort of to the beginning of the book, rewinding, if you will, to the moment you went into your first sort of draft of your final wishes.
Mm-hmm.
Pulling them out of the file, I seem to recall that you said it was sort of like putting on a pair of jeans from your teen years or from high school. Like, oh my God, those do not fit at all.
Right.
And your first draft of your final wishes, when you pulled them out, the time did not fit at all. And I think it might be nice for our listener to really consider what those final wishes would look like. Of course, there's the legal aspect of a trust for your children, not just a will, but a trust. That's really important if you have young kids and you're listening. Your final wishes in terms of your things, like your material things. My notebooks are going to certain people. My clothing is going to certain other people. You know what I mean? Like, I have thoughts about these things. Tell us a little bit about the process of you getting your affairs in order, even at this young age of your late 50s, and why you put your papers in a freezer. I've just ordered 12 by 15 Ziplocs so that I can do the same.
That's so funny.
Tell our listener. Come on.
Yeah, no, I'm laughing too. Basically, I think my perception of final wishes or directives was that it was something you did once. And even though both my parents died in sudden and unexpected ways, they were at the peak of their health. You would have thought I would have been like, oh, okay, I'm going to get everything in order like ASAP. But, I was like pregnant with my second kid. I was getting a divorce. I was like, I was teaching full time, was writing. And I didn't revisit my final directives, which were for flame cremation, until years later. And, the scene you described was when really I got interested in writing this book. And I thought, well, geez, I've got to get this out of the file. And so I did. And I realized, okay, there's more options than I knew about 10 years ago when I wrote this. And so I was actually presenting with some friends on ring burial at a conference at my church. And I was realizing with the other speakers how much I really, in addition, didn't know. And that's one of the facilitators. She gave the advice to keep your directives in the freezer in case of a fire, they wouldn't be destroyed. And I mean, I'll be honest with you, I did that for a little bit, after I finally changed my final wishes. But we have a small refrigerator, a small freezer, and they're in a filing cabinet now. So full disclosure, they're now in a filing cabinet. But the woman who runs a center on death and dying here, she says, put them in a Ziploc bag in the freezer. And it's true, they won't get destroyed. And everybody knows where to find them. I just admitted that they're not in the freezer anymore.
What I really like about this, though, is that it gave me the idea. I totally ordered some big Ziplocs. I'm definitely putting mine in the freezer. I think that's a wonderful plan. Going to have my partner do the same thing. I think it's worth it. With a bunch of actually important papers, why keep them in a file cabinet?
Right. Well, and the reality is that if I think about where in my file cabinet right now, it would take some sifting through as well as, on my computer. So it makes a lot of sense. I could have just fibbed and said that they're still in the freezer, but I can't lie to you. I would, however, like to put my name on the clothing distribution list of your guys.
Oh, dude, I'm happy to do that. What size is your foot, incidentally?
Let's see, 8.5.
Yeah.
Oh, maybe 9.
It's so weird. I'm sitting here looking at this gorgeous, very tall pair of brown suede boots with a really beautiful design on them that I set aside this morning, admitting to myself that I have never worn them. And I need somebody who has an 8.5, 9 foot.
That is hysterical.
That's so weird. I'm sending them to you. Please email me your mailing address. I'm sending them your way.
Well, and this is all related to taking care of our possessions, right?
Yeah. I will buy so few things now per year. Yeah. Maybe 2 or 3 pieces of clothing a year. I have everything I need. And it's nice to pass along the things that don't get worn. It's really funny that you have the same size.
That's hysterical.
I know. I think you'll really like these too.
That is so cute.
I think I covered everything I wanted to cover, including the paperwork, which I'm glad we got to. For our listener, if you're interested in this book, I have my copy. And I don't need it anymore. So if you want to leave a comment regarding the podcast in your favorite podcast app, email me and let me know, info@elenabrower.com. I'll pick one of the comments and I'll go ahead and send you my copy. I like to
That's wonderful.
Recycle the book, rather than put it in some bin somewhere. It's such a wonderful book, Mallory McDuff. I'm so grateful to talk to you a second time. I'm grateful for your time, for your generosity of energy and attention, and for the research that you did for this. I'm heading into chaplaincy starting in a couple of months for a 2-year training at upaya.org. And this experience of reading this book and considering all of this will definitely factor into my study. And I really appreciate you.
Thank you so much. It's been a complete and total honor.
Yeah, wonderful. More again soon, I hope. Anytime you need me, I'm here. And I really thank you so much from my heart for all that you do.
Thank you.